Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this recording for SheLeads in Tech. Today, I've got a very special guest to discuss a topic that I'm sure it is close to all of our hearts. And well, if not all hearts, then certainly all the hearts on the SheLeads in Tech platform. My guest today is Dr. Esther Mukuka. She's an equality, diversity, and inclusion expert in health and social care. And today we're going to be exploring the root cause behind the statistics we all know behind women in tech and STEM in general. So welcome, Esther. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lydia. It's such a great opportunity to be invited to speak today on your platform and to be part of the incredible guests that you've invited to speak on your platform. And as you say, I'm really passionate about diversity and inclusion, and I hope I can shed some light on some of the issues that organizations may want to start thinking about, or, you know, for all of us to start putting into practice individually to improve the representation of women in STEM and in tech. But no, it's really great to be on your platform today.
Thank you so much, Esther. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you here. So just before we get into discussing all of the questions I've written down for you today, I'm sure you will do justice and more to all of them. I wanted to get to know you better and help our audience get to know you better. So can you tell us about you and your career professionally, and also anything you like to get up to in your spare time?
Yeah, so I like to always say that I stumbled into diversity and inclusion because my background, or my educational background, is politics and international relations, and I did a PhD in women and security, which, I mean, there's some implication for diversity and inclusion, but it is different. And I went into higher education to practice. Well, I started practicing diversity and inclusion in higher education, and decided to move into health and social care as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I really felt like there was something for me to do and to contribute to the COVID-19 to health and social care as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, it's been a steep learning curve for me. It's been eye-opening, but certainly understand that actually for us to improve the health and wealth of the nation, we've got to think equitably. We've got to do science in a fair way. We've got to be inclusive of a diversity of people and a diversity of thoughts and approaches to improve, you know, to improve everyone's experience of health and social care. So that's where I am at the moment. Who knows where next I'll go? Maybe finance. There seems to be an interest bubbling in me for finance, but who knows? And then, as my hobbies, I like to say that my kitchen is the most used space in the house because we love to cook and experiment. And I also like to swim when I can, when I get the chance to. I love to do that too.
Okay, that's all amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that, Esther. So just to give a bit of background on why I selected this topic to discuss with you. So of course you are an equality, diversity and inclusion expert. And one of the questions that has been bubbling in my mind since starting the SheLeads in Tech podcast and the SheLeads platform is on really understanding what is behind the statistics we have around women and STEM, around women in tech and STEM in general. And, you know, I've been reading a lot of, you know, publications, and there's been all sorts of symptoms, I would say, about, we know there are less women, in leadership and all of the symptoms. But one of the things I wanted to do was to really start to understand some of the causes. And the first question I really want to put to you today is a very basic one, but it's really, why is there a gender gap between men and women we find in STEM in the first place? How did we get here?
Mm. So that's a really interesting question to start with. And I don't think that there is one silver bullet, answer for all of, for that particular question. I think that there are multiple factors that has led us to where we are today. But maybe I try and touch on a few things that I think has led to this. I think you can definitely see within education itself that there is a talent pipeline, and there's an issue with women, with attrition rates in the talent pipeline, and women actually choosing STEM and tech courses and modules to take, from all the way from further education to higher education. And as you go in that educational pipeline, you see how women continue to drop off. And so I think some of the issues stem all the way back to education and what we need to do to raise awareness of why women should be in STEM and in tech, and actually let women know that you can do it. You can do it. Like I say, I'm not from a STEM background, but that was partly because, I struggled with math, and it was just kind of like people made peace with the fact that I was always going to struggle with math, as opposed to actually what can we do to encourage you, to teach you a different way, to understand your needs, right? So you can enjoy math. Math should be for everyone. I'm now at this age and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying learning and I'm enjoying data. When back in the day in further education, I was told, don't worry, you can just find something that you can do easily. So I think education has a big role to play in it. Then, and secondly, and maybe finally, because we've got a long list of questions to work through, is, organizational structures not really being developed in a way that doesn't really encourage women to then choose occupations in STEM. I think that there is a lot of work needed to diagnose some of the issues within organizations, which means that they become exclusionary, which means that, things like working models, although those are changing now, have discouraged women from going into particular fields. Some of the culture and toxicity within organizational environments as well, which meant that women are not able to thrive, talk less of being able to survive in those environments. And just organizational policies as well, which don't encourage women to get into particular sectors and into particular occupations. So I think it's a combination of factors, but definitely I would say education and then also organizational structures as well.
That is quite a robust response, and I could resonate in particular with that education and how women get into STEM, because I remember when I was in secondary school, it wasn't the norm that women got into STEM. It was rather that it was the exception. So as a woman to be considered, or to be, well, as a girl, I would say, to be considered or encouraged to go into STEM, you had to appear as the exception to the norm before people even looked that way. And not to preempt your answers for you, but then reflecting on that from the organizational perspective, I know many women have had conversations with, have also that exceptional requirements on them, where if you're a woman in the STEM field, it's again on that organizational level, an exception rather than a norm, and all of that. So I think that was a really good point to draw out. But just in terms of all of these factors, another point that has been bugging me is whether these issues are actually as complex as they were. So of course, equality and diversity, it is your forte, and there's a whole body of research around it. But when I think of it, and being me, I tend to try to simplify things to the lowest common denominator to help my understanding. And when I try to flip that on equality and diversity, I always ask, is it as complex? So you being the expert, my question is, are the factors as complex as they appear?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think because they're multifaceted, they are complex. Right. And I think also because diversity and inclusion issues are so related to social identity and how people see themselves and how people want to be seen and how people want to be valued, and you know, some of those intangible things that we do not pay attention to, so value, sense of belonging, all of those things, I think that they can become complex. And however, I think that where there is commitment, when there is a commitment to addressing these issues, that there are a variety of tools now, and there's evidence out there that if you implement certain interventions, you get an answer. But again, the willingness is the key point is willingness and commitment. And we can see that actually after the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of organizations woke up to diversity and inclusion. And you know, many years after that, a lot of organizations have gone quiet again because they don't know where to start with addressing all of these issues. But I say that there is a lot of evidence out there. You know, PwC have done a lot of research on diversity and inclusion, and there is evidence that there is value in doing it, that implementing inclusive recruitment processes actually means that you get diversity of thought within your organization, that there is a business case, not just a moral, ethical case, but there is a business case for doing it. So, you know, I'm not going to say it's not complex. You know, some of the work you need to do to diversity and inclusion well is collect data, for example. But if the structures for the collection and analysis of the data are not in place, there may be an ambition. You can very well have a massive ambition to understand your data, but then you face the challenge of not having the systems in place to help you do that work. So I think that because some organizations anyway, having been built with inclusion, the foundation has not been inclusion. What they experience when they're trying to retrofit inclusion is that difficulty, because it's multifaceted, and because it's people, and people are complex and fascinating and dynamic, and for that reason, you know, there's a level of complexity to it.
Well, that is excellent. And just on those points you've made, there are lots of questions that have just come up in my head, but I'm really going to try to stick to the script, because one of the questions I had on my list here is around understanding the structural and systemic practices in today's workplace that have contributed to the gender gap in tech and STEM. And you touched on that in saying, you know, we are trying to retrofit a solution to either a culture or an organization where that wasn't the original intent. So can you expand on that point a bit?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about retrofitting, I think you know, I was just studying root cause analysis and trying to do a fishbone analysis for diversity and inclusion
Right.
before our chat today. And actually, in doing that, you know, I was reminded that actually, when you look at some of the systemic structural issues, what some organizations are doing today is not trying to diagnose what the challenges are, you know, and this is partly because many groups have been underrepresented. Organizations feel like, right, we just need to jump straight to answer the question or to provide in a question. And this is where the retrofitting comes in, as opposed to taking time to understand, right, let's take a step back. What are some of the challenges in our recruitment that mean we are not attracting a diverse set of candidates to our positions within the organization? And then you take another step back from that question to say, okay, so why is that happening? Is that because we are not advertising in non-traditional media, non-traditional agencies that would help us reach those diverse candidates that we want to reach? And then if you look, you can look forward and then say, right, okay, if we're not doing all of those things, that means we're only recruiting a certain type of person into the organization, right? And then you recruit that person, and then you do a gender gap analysis. And why will you be surprised that there's a gender gap?
And is that because some organizations tend to be focused on bringing in people who can meet the current needs rather than trying to evolve to meet a future need, or evolve to meet a social need, so to speak?
I think that, again, with that, there's like multiple issues. I think that we tend to be sometimes very, we tend to have tunnel vision. There's a job to do, there's a task to do, just get someone to fix that, as opposed to thinking, right, we as an organization have a corporate social responsibility. We've got diversity and inclusion. We've got a commitment to sustainability. We've got all of these strategies embedded in legislation that we need to be delivering towards, right? And then how do those things then influence how we do recruitment? How do those things then influence how we think about talent and how we diversify talent to address those needs? So if I am recruiting, I want to ensure that it's on, it goes out widely, that I'm considering people from a range of sectors. For me, for example, working in health and social care, I would have never thought I would have gotten in because of my background, right? Yeah. But I'm doing the job in health and social care. Did it mean that I had to, like I said earlier, it's a steep learning curve because, it's a new area, but that there is an investment for me to be able to do that, for me to grow, as well as to bring my own contribution and thought diversity to a room where there's always usually a higher proportion of people from the health and from health sciences and medical sciences and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good perspective to draw out of that point you made, because businesses and organizations need to have that view from the beginning, that we are making an investment and that is going to produce returns, and not just trying to fill a gap because it's the government policy or legislative requirement to do that. But it really has to be a shift from, instead of just ticking the boxes, we are making an investment. And like you said, we've got the research and evidence now to show that research pays off.
Yes.
And will pay off eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think you've already touched on the sub question I had around organization and systemic practices, but I just wanted to ask you to maybe outline a couple of initiatives that are maybe going on in the social space that you know about to help address some of the equality and diversity issues we all know.
I think a lot of people, especially living under a rock at the moment, would have heard that Airbnb announced recently that its employees could work from anywhere,
Yes.
and, it will support. And look at that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people were looking at Airbnb's website for job
I was
opportunity.
excited. I was thrilled.
Yes, looking for job opportunities. And, I know not many organizations are in the position to support that yet, but another example is how in the UK, there are a number of organizations now piloting a 4-day week for their employees, and just to see how that improves employee satisfaction and health and well-being,
Yeah.
given that the pandemic showed us how fragile the mental health of the nation is, and how we need to, as organizations, to look after that. So I think that there are policies around recruitment, around work, work-life balance that can be introduced, and we can see these rich examples being already implemented by several organizations. And I think hybrid working as well is another thing. I work in a hybrid organization, and that's amazing, because for me, being my home is important, but I also value the networking that I can do with my colleagues, and to be able to be there for my team, and to have that physical connection with my team whenever we have the opportunity. So there are things like that. I think in terms of the culture, and there's so many culture initiatives that can be put in place within a working environment. I think, simple things like staff networks and affinity groups, to where staff can talk about issues, but also support the organization with innovative ideas to address the challenges that exist. I am so passionate about staff networks, because if empowered effectively, they really are the powerhouse for the organization, because they've got a vested interest in helping organizations evolve, and helping organizations become the place where people want to stay, and can be they can be invaluable for supporting retention within organizations.
Yeah, that is excellent, because when I have thought about staff networks before hearing this, I understand the support and all of that, but I've never thought about the innovative element and how the staff network can also feed into the business. But I can follow your logic from the explanation to see, if there's a staff network, people are supported, then they can innovate, and then the business benefits from that innovation as well. And I think that is a new takeaway for me. Not something I've understood or learned. Thank you. And you did lead quite naturally into my next question around COVID and how the pandemic has affected women in STEM and tech-related occupation. So is there any research statistics available to help understand whether COVID has either made the gender gap wider, or made it even, or made it shrink by any chance?
So I haven't read any papers. To be honest, I haven't done that research myself to see what data is out there. Yeah. But I think we've got anecdotal evidence that really states that for women carried a lot of the burdens associated with the working from home and the homeschooling, and this is not to say in any way that it was always the case for all of the households across the UK.
Yeah.
But and I don't have a specific statistic associated with that I can quote, but I would say from a general perspective that we can see that, and from a lived experience perspective as well, that, I think COVID-19 affected a lot of people's mental health and mental well-being. I think COVID-19 also had an impact in terms of the Great Resignation. A lot of people have been really rethinking what is work.
Yes.
What is work? And I think all of us will have had that moment where we stopped and thought, is this it? Is this really it? And it would be great. And I read recently the Gallup survey around the Great Resignation, and how actually a lot of people were either resigning from work or thinking about leaving work. And it'll be interesting to see what the gender split for that is, because I didn't come across that in my research. But I expect, as I'll speak as for myself as a woman, and that there were moments where I did stop to think, what are the best things of work, and what is work offering me at the moment, that is different from from before the start of the pandemic. That means that I can have a better work-life balance to help me continue in the world of work. I definitely know that I never considered flexible working before COVID-19, and that was something that I've considered and explored what the benefits are associated with that.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's an area that's just going to become more obvious as the research develops. But it was one of those questions, that is really on the top of my list, which is, what has COVID done to the stats? And it would just be interesting to follow that, just to see where we have landed, because I guess intuitively you would think that because COVID has forced all of us, as you said, to either consider, well, at least at first during the proper lockdowns, everyone had to work from home, right? So unless you needed to physically be somewhere to do your job, you worked from home. So that was a forced situation for most people. But just as you said, your experience of finding yourself in a different situation, I think it will be one everyone can resonate with, which is, we're now in this place where work and life have now meddled. So it's difficult to separate one from the other. And I think that in itself will present quite a lot of interesting challenges.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Cool. So my next question is one you touched on earlier when you were discussing organization and structures, is around visibility and representation in leadership. So I wanted to ask you if, the current state in tech leadership, and I guess in many global leadership organizations where it's mostly led by men, has that fueled in one way or the other unconscious bias against women entering those same positions, either in just any industry, but more specifically in tech and STEM areas?
Yeah, so we know that from research, we know that role models have a huge role to play in where people choose to go in terms of their occupations. And I think in general, it's fair to say that things are getting better. However, data still shows that, in C-suite jobs is still highly dominated by men. But to answer your question, I think that because there is a lack of role models at that senior level, it is less clear to people, right? How do we break the barriers? How do we, as ourselves, go into areas like this? But also, is it safe? I think people ask the question, if someone like me isn't represented in that organization, is it safe for me to enter that organization?
Yeah.
And it may be a small question, but actually it's a massive question. If I am looking at like an organization and I try and find who the leaders are, and I look at websites and I cannot see people like me within leadership, people like me within teams, the question I'll be asking myself is whether it's safe to enter this organization, and whether this organization, values diversity, whether this organization values women and the contribution that women have to offer. So I think role modeling is huge, and organizations need to pay attention to that. I think it's, the other day I was looking on LinkedIn and I saw, I think it's the chief diversity officer for Google. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, they're a woman, right? And for me, I felt, the next thing I did is, how did she get there?
Yes. We need to bring her here to tell us about.
Yeah, how did she get there? And I spent time looking at her employment and all of that, and her employment history and educational history, because then I know exactly what to do to also get there.
No, that is such a good point, and it's one that we experience here. The last 2 weeks, our guest speaker Rose Singleton was here with us, and it was just amazing to hear a human being, a woman, not just human, talking about how she got to her current position of being a CEO, because that wasn't and definitely isn't something that is in popular supply. So it was great to hear of that, of her experience. And like you said, you kind of look at the breadth of experience of your role models, and then it's relatable, right? You can say, okay, she was a project manager when she was 5 years into her career, and this is what she did. And maybe for a mentee or anyone looking up to someone or a woman in those positions, they could go, I can see she didn't need to be for 5 years, because she could have learned it in 2 years, or I've got a different background, or I'm there. So it is so important, right? Because people would see, and then they would start to model themselves.
Absolutely. And that's the power of role models. That is the power. It's a simple thing, but you put it out there, and someone is saying, oh, like you say, oh, only senior project manager for 2 years. Okay, what did they do within those 2 years? And it almost acts as a guide. And by doing that, the mentorship process even occurs without a formal mentoring relationship needed. Yes.
Yeah, that is cool. Well, we're now into the segment where we discuss what we can do. So obviously we've talked about organizations, we've talked about employers, we touched slightly on regulations and policies, and we talked about individuals, what we can do. But I just wanted to round that out to conclude our discussion, just to ask, what should government or policymakers do or be doing to create a level playing field for women in tech and STEM? What can employers do in their own space to improve diversity? And then what can I, as an individual, do for myself?
Thank you. So I think with government, I think the government has a lot of has a role to play in just creating policies that actually encourage employers to think about diversity. So at the moment, we have the Equality Act 2010, which there's this public sector equality duty that organizations have to ensure that they are not discriminating against women or anyone across those 9 protected characteristics, to to join organizations. But I think, the government has leverage in pushing for more flexible working policies, hybrid working, and, encouraging people to retrain. And, we can see government policies out these days. In terms of organizations, I think if you don't have a strategy for diversity and inclusion, it should be part of your organizational strategy. Your organizational strategy is incomplete, and I say that boldly, if you do not have an approach to diversity and inclusion. You've got to have a strategic delivery plan and a set of principles, actionable points to support diversifying talent within your organization, diversifying opportunities within your organization, and ensuring that your organization is inclusive. I think it's fair to say that you are behind the curve if you don't have a strategy. So it's important as organizations to think about that. But a strategy is a strategy. It can hang on a shelf somewhere. It's really about the actionable points and really engaging with your key stakeholders to ensure that you are implementing it and that you are measuring success. I think in terms of an individual, I think we've got a big part to play in terms of making inclusion pervasive. It needs to be everywhere. And we've got roles we are role models, we are ambassadors. How we speak to people. The only reason I did the PhD is because a professor said, you can do it. Right. And that's why I then stopped and thought to myself, okay, well, I can do it. If someone thinks I can, then actually I need to think better of myself. I can do it. And I think it needs to start from home, but it needs to start with our relationships at work. The way we speak to each other needs to be inclusive. And we need to encourage people to try different things. I don't think that, I think life has shown us, and I'm sure you can attest to that as well, that there is no single linear career pathway. So it's about trying different things. And I think part of our responsibility is to encourage people. Doesn't matter how old you are, try something in STEM, try something in tech, learn how to code, learn how to, I've been seeing a lot of things and I'm thinking, can I learn how to code? Will I change my career when I'm 35? Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, this has been a really engaging and enlightening conversation into EDI in general, and I really want to thank you because there's lots of things I've learned from this conversation that I didn't know before. And of course, as with all of these sessions, there's always a lot to chew on and process. But again, I just wanted to thank you for joining us here today to share your thoughts on a Friday afternoon. I know there'll be lots of things you would rather be doing. So really chuffed you prioritized being here with me. And again, thanks for sharing your experience and expertise with us here.
No, thank you, Lydia. And, to be honest, there's no better way to spend my Friday afternoon than being able to talk about this. So it's great to have been able to contribute in whatever way I can to the platform, and hopefully, this is not the first and the last time to be invited. Thank you, and you have a lovely afternoon as well.
You too, Esther. Cheers.